What happens when one of Hollywood's most outspoken legends sits down with daytime television's most controversial panel? You won't believe what unfolds when Samuel L. Jackson faces off against The View hosts in what quickly becomes the most explosive confrontation in the show's history. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a masterclass in how quickly things can spiral completely out of control when egos clash and boundaries get crossed. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds. Last night's episode of The View was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance, but what actually happened left audiences stunned and the studio in complete chaos. The tension was palpable from the moment Samuel L. Jackson walked onto that familiar set. You could feel it in the air. Something was different about this appearance. The veteran actor, known for his no-nonsense attitude and fierce independence, settled into his chair with the kind of quiet intensity that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. The hosts, seemingly oblivious to the brewing storm, launched into their usual routine with their trademark smugness. Joy Behar opened with what she probably thought was a harmless question about Jackson's latest film project. But there was an underlying condescension in her tone that didn't go unnoticed. "Samuel, we're so excited to have you here promoting your new action movie. At your age, don't you think it's time to maybe slow down and take on more, shall we say, age-appropriate roles?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Jackson's eyes narrowed slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Age-appropriate? What exactly does that mean, Joy? Are you suggesting I'm too old to do my job?" Whoopi Goldberg jumped in, trying to smooth things over with her usual diplomatic approach, but even she couldn't hide the patronizing undertone. "What Joy means is that we worry about you doing all those stunts and action sequences. We care about your well-being." "My well-being." Jackson's voice carried that familiar edge that anyone who'd seen his movies would recognize. "I've been doing this for over 4 decades. I think I know how to handle my own career choices." But it was Sunny Hostin who really lit the fuse with her next comment. She leaned forward with that self-satisfied expression she wore whenever she thought she was about to make a profound point. "Samuel, don't you think there's a responsibility that comes with your platform? Your movies are incredibly violent, and with everything happening in our society today, shouldn't celebrities like you be more conscious about the content you're putting out there?" The studio fell silent. Even the camera operators seemed to sense that something significant was happening. Jackson's jaw tightened, and for a moment, you could see him processing not just the question, but the implications behind it. This wasn't just about his career choices anymore. This was about artistic freedom, personal responsibility, and the right to make his own decisions without being lectured by a panel of talk show hosts. "Let me get this straight," Jackson said, his voice deadly calm. "You're sitting here telling me that I'm responsible for violence in society because I play fictional characters in movies? That's what you're going with." Sarah Haynes, perhaps sensing the growing tension, tried to redirect the conversation. "We're not saying you're responsible, Samuel. We're just asking if you ever consider the impact of your work on impressionable viewers." "Impressionable viewers?" Jackson's laugh was sharp and humorless. "You mean adults who can tell the difference between entertainment and reality? Or are you talking about parents who should be monitoring what their children watch instead of expecting Hollywood to raise their kids for them?" The hosts exchanged glances, clearly not expecting this level of pushback. They were used to celebrities who would nod along politely, maybe offer a diplomatic non-answer, and keep things moving smoothly. But Jackson wasn't playing that game. Alyssa Farah Griffin, the newest addition to the panel, decided to take a different approach. "Samuel, I think what we're all trying to say is that in today's climate, with all the gun violence and social unrest, don't you think entertainment should be more responsible? More uplifting." "More uplifting," Jackson repeated, his voice rising slightly. "You want me to make movies about rainbows and unicorns? Is that what you think my job is? To make you feel better about the world?" Joy Behar, clearly irritated that her initial question had started this entire mess, decided to double down. "There's no need to be defensive, Samuel. We're just having a conversation about social responsibility." "Defensive?" Jackson's eyes flashed. "Lady, I'm not being defensive. I'm being real. You invited me here to talk about my work, and instead you're lecturing me about how I should live my life and conduct my career. That's not a conversation. That's a sermon." The atmosphere in the studio had shifted completely. What started as a routine celebrity interview was rapidly becoming something much more intense. The hosts were clearly unprepared for this level of resistance, and Jackson was just getting started. Whoopi tried once more to regain control of the situation. Samuel, we respect your work and your right to choose your projects. But surely you can understand our concerns about the messages being sent to young people. Your concerns? Jackson leaned back in his chair, his expression incredulous. Who appointed you the moral guardians of America? You sit here every day talking about politics, throwing around accusations, stirring up controversy, and you want to lecture me about sending the wrong message. The accusation hit home, and you could see it in their faces. These were women who built their careers on being outspoken, on taking controversial positions, on never backing down from a fight. But suddenly they were being called out by someone who wasn't going to be intimidated by their platform or their attitude. Sonny Hostin's voice took on a sharper edge. That's completely different, Samuel. We're discussing real issues that affect real people. You're glorifying violence for entertainment. Glorifying violence. Jackson's voice was getting louder now, and the cameras were capturing every moment of this unprecedented confrontation. I'm telling stories. I'm portraying characters. If you can't tell the difference between fiction and reality, that's not my problem, that's yours. The tension was reaching a breaking point, and everyone in the studio could feel it. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. This was a full-scale clash of worldviews, and neither side was backing down. The hosts had clearly expected Jackson to be another compliant celebrity guest, but they had seriously underestimated who they were dealing with. What happened next would change everything, as the conversation was about to take a turn that no one saw coming. Ana Navarro, who had been unusually quiet throughout the exchange, suddenly decided to jump into the fray with the kind of comment that would ignite the powder keg. Samuel, I think what my colleagues are trying to say is that maybe it's time for you to evolve beyond these primitive action roles. Don't you want to leave behind a more sophisticated legacy? The word primitive hung in the air like a slap across the face. Jackson's entire demeanor shifted in that instant. His eyes went cold, and when he spoke, his voice carried a dangerous quiet that made everyone in the studio lean forward. Primitive, Jackson repeated slowly, each syllable dripping with controlled fury. Did you just call my work primitive? Ana, seemingly oblivious to the volcano she had just triggered, pressed on. I mean, the constant gunplay, the aggressive characters, the angry black man stereotype. Surely you can see how that's not exactly progressive storytelling. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the audience, which had been murmuring throughout the confrontation, went completely still. Jackson stared at Ana with an intensity that could have melted steel, and you could practically see the temperature in the room drop several degrees. The angry black man stereotype, Jackson said, his voice barely above a whisper, but somehow more menacing than if he had shouted. That's what you think I am? That's what you think my career represents? Joy Behar, perhaps realizing that Ana had crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed, tried to intervene. Samuel, I don't think Ana meant it that way. No, no, no. Jackson cut her off, holding up his hand. Let her finish. I want to hear exactly what she means. Please, Ana, tell me more about these stereotypes I'm supposedly perpetuating. Ana, now visibly uncomfortable but too proud to back down, doubled down on her position. I'm just saying that in today's cultural climate, there are opportunities to break new ground, to show different facets of the Black experience that don't involve violence and anger. Different facets of the Black experience, Jackson repeated, his voice getting stronger and more dangerous with each word. And you're the one who gets to decide what those facets should be. You're going to sit there and tell me how to be Black in Hollywood. The confrontation had now moved far beyond artistic differences. This was personal, and everyone knew it. The hosts were clearly in over their heads, but instead of backing down, they seemed determined to dig themselves deeper into the hole they had created. Whoopi tried to regain control, but her voice lacked its usual authority. Samuel, I think we're all just trying to have a meaningful conversation about representation. Representation? Jackson's laugh was bitter and sharp. You want to talk about representation? Let's talk about it. I've been in this business longer than some of you have been alive. I've worked with directors of every color. I've played characters across the entire spectrum of human experience. and I've earned every single role I've ever gotten. But you want to reduce all of that to some stereotype. Sonny Hostin, clearly feeling defensive, fired back. No one's reducing your career, Samuel. We're just suggesting that with great power comes great responsibility, and maybe great responsibility. Jackson interrupted, his voice rising to a level that made everyone flinch. You're quoting Spider-Man at me now? Are you serious? You think I don't understand responsibility? You think I don't know what my success means or what it represents? The studio was electric with tension. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. This was a full-scale battle, and Jackson was winning every single exchange. The hosts, who were used to being the ones asking the tough questions and putting their guests on the defensive, were now finding themselves completely outmatched by someone who refused to be intimidated. Sarah Haynes made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Samuel, we didn't mean to upset you. We just think that in times like these, entertainment should maybe focus on bringing people together rather than what? Jackson's voice was like thunder now. Rather than telling honest stories about real people, rather than showing the full range of human emotion and experience, you want everything sanitized and safe and comfortable for your suburban audience. That's not what we're saying, Joy protested, but her voice lacked conviction. That's exactly what you're saying, Jackson shot back. You want me to be your acceptable version of a black actor. You want me to smile and nod and make movies that won't make anyone uncomfortable. Well, let me tell you something, I didn't get where I am by being comfortable, and I sure as hell didn't get here by letting people like you tell me how to do my job. Anna, still smarting from Jackson's earlier response, made the mistake of trying to get the last word. We're not telling you how to do your job, Samuel. We're just asking you to consider the impact of your choices on the community. The community. Jackson's eyes flashed with fury. What community is that, Anna? Are you speaking for my community now? Did they elect you as their representative while I wasn't paying attention? The question hit like a physical blow. Anna's face flushed red, and for the first time in the entire confrontation, she seemed genuinely speechless. The other hosts looked around at each other, clearly realizing that they had pushed too far and that there was no graceful way out of this situation. Whoopi made one final attempt to restore some semblance of order. Samuel, I think we've gotten off track here. This wasn't supposed to be an adversarial conversation. Jackson leaned forward in his chair, his voice deadly serious. Oh, but it is adversarial, Whoopi. It became adversarial the moment you all decided that you knew better than I do about my own career, my own choices, and my own identity. You invited me here to promote my work, and instead you turned it into an intervention. The word intervention hung in the air like an accusation. That's exactly what this had felt like, a group of people who thought they knew better trying to convince someone to change their ways for their own good. But Jackson wasn't having any of it. An intervention, he continued, his voice building to a crescendo, where you get to play therapist, and I'm supposed to be the patient who needs to be fixed. Well, I've got news for you. I don't need fixing. I don't need your approval. And I sure as hell don't need your permission to be who I am. The confrontation had reached its peak, and everyone in the studio knew it. This was no longer about movies or social responsibility or artistic choices. This was about respect, dignity, and the right to exist without having to justify yourself to people who had already made up their minds about who you should be. What happened next would be the moment that everyone would remember, the moment that would be replayed over and over again, the moment that would define not just this interview, but the entire relationship between celebrity and media accountability. Joy Behar, clearly frustrated by how completely the interview had spiraled out of their control, made the fatal mistake of trying to regain authority through condescension. Samuel, you're being very emotional right now. Maybe we should take a breath and approach this more rationally. The word emotional was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Jackson's face went completely stone cold, and when he spoke, his voice carried the kind of quiet menace that made everyone in the studio instinctively lean back in their chairs. Emotional, Jackson said, the word rolling off his tongue like a curse. Did you just call me emotional for standing up for myself? For refusing to let you disrespect me on national television? Joy realized immediately that she had made a catastrophic error, but it was too late to take it back. I didn't mean . No, you meant exactly what you said. Jackson cut her off. You think that because I'm not sitting here like a good little guest, nodding along while you lecture me, That makes me emotional. You think that because I have the audacity to push back against your condescending questions, I'm being irrational. The studio was dead silent except for the quiet hum of the cameras, which were capturing every moment of this unprecedented meltdown. The audience was transfixed, watching what was clearly the most explosive confrontation in the show's history unfold in real time. Sunny Hostin, apparently deciding that the situation couldn't get any worse, chose that moment to make it infinitely worse. Samuel, we're not your enemies here. We're just trying to have an honest conversation about accountability in the entertainment industry. Accountability? Jackson's voice rose to a level that made the microphones crackle. You want to talk about accountability? Let's talk about yours. When was the last time any of you were held accountable for the things you say on this show? When was the last time you faced consequences for your opinions? The question hung in the air like a challenge. The hosts exchanged nervous glances, clearly unprepared for having the tables turned on them so completely. We're held accountable every day, Whoopi said defensively. We face criticism, we get pushback. Jackson laughed, but there was no humor in it. You get pushback? You sit in your protected little bubble, surrounded by people who agree with you, and you call that accountability? You've never had to worry about whether your opinions would cost you work. You've never had to choose between speaking your mind and paying your bills. Ana Navarro, still smarting from Jackson's earlier verbal beatdown, made the mistake of trying to interrupt. That's not fair, Samuel. We've all worked hard to get where we are hard work. Jackson's voice was incredulous. You think sitting at this table, reading from teleprompters, and giving your hot takes on current events is hard work? You think that compares to what I've had to do to build my career? The contempt in his voice was palpable, and you could see it hitting its mark. These were women who prided themselves on their intelligence, their insights, their ability to handle any situation, and they were being systematically dismantled by someone who had finally had enough of their self-righteousness. Sarah Haynes made one last desperate attempt to find some middle ground. Samuel, we respect your achievements and your career. We're just trying to understand your perspective on these important issues. My perspective? Jackson stood up slowly, his full height making him an imposing figure on the small talk show. Set. My perspective is that I don't need to justify my life's work to a panel of people who have never walked in my shoes, never faced the challenges I've faced, and never had to prove themselves the way I have. The gesture of standing up sent a clear message. The interview was over, whether the hosts wanted it to be or not. But Jackson wasn't finished yet. You want to know what I think is irresponsible, he continued, his voice carrying clearly through the silent studio. I think it's irresponsible to invite someone onto your show and then spend the entire time trying to tear them down. I think it's irresponsible to pretend you're having a conversation when what you're really doing is conducting an ambush. Joy Behar, perhaps realizing that they were watching their guest preparation to leave, made one final attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. Samuel, please sit down. We can discuss this like adults. Jackson's response was swift and final. Like adults? You mean like the adults you've been for the past 20 minutes while you question my intelligence, my choices, my integrity, and my identity? Those kinds of adults. The sarcasm was devastating, and you could see it hitting home with each of the hosts. They had completely lost control of the situation, and everyone in the studio knew it. You know what the real problem is here, Jackson continued, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience and frustration. The real problem is that you can't handle someone who won't bow down to your authority. You're used to celebrities who come on here and play nice, who smile and nod and give you the sound bites you want. But I'm not one of those people. Whoopi made one last attempt to maintain some dignity. Samuel, we never expected you to bow down to anyone. We just thought you thought wrong. Jackson interrupted. You thought you could lecture me about my career, my choices, my impact on society, and I would just sit here and take it. You thought you could reduce 40 years of work to some stereotype, and I would thank you for the privilege. The studio was absolutely electric with tension. This wasn't just a failed interview anymore. This was a complete breakdown of the traditional celebrity-media relationship, and everyone knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. Jackson picked up the small microphone that had been clipped to his shirt and calmly removed it, the small gesture somehow more dramatic than if he had ripped it off in anger. I came here to talk about my work, to connect with an audience, to share something meaningful. Instead, I got a lecture from people who think they know better than I do about my own life." He placed the microphone gently on the table, the soft click somehow deafeningly loud in the silent studio. "You want to know what's really irresponsible?" Jackson said, his voice now carrying a finality that made everyone hold their breath. "What's irresponsible is wasting people's time with this kind of amateur hour journalism. What's irresponsible is pretending to be journalists when what you really are is a bunch of people with opinions and a platform." With that, Jackson turned and walked toward the exit, his stride confident and purposeful. The cameras followed him, capturing every step of what would become one of the most talked about moments in talk show history. As he reached the edge of the set, he paused and turned back one final time. "And for the record," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the stunned studio, "I'm not emotional. I'm disgusted." The studio door closed behind Samuel L. Jackson with a soft thud that somehow sounded like a thunderclap. The View hosts sat in stunned silence, looking at each other with expressions that ranged from shock to embarrassment to something approaching fear. The audience was completely quiet, processing what they had just witnessed. The cameras continued rolling, capturing the aftermath of the most explosive confrontation in the show's history. No one quite knew what to say or how to proceed. The interview that was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance had turned into a masterclass in how quickly things can go wrong when respect is absent and assumptions are made in those final moments of silence. With the empty chair where Jackson had been sitting serving as a powerful symbol of what had just transpired, everyone in that studio knew they had witnessed something that would be talked about for years to come. The View would continue, but this moment would define how people remembered the day Samuel L. Jackson walked off their set and left them sitting in the wreckage of their own making.